I grew up in a haunted house. My parents still live there to this day. Most traumatic experiences of my life. The one memory that tops the list is one I hate telling and rarely do. I would always wake up in the middle of the night and see stuff. From as young as I can remember until I moved out at 18. One night, when I was about 6, I woke up to see a man and woman, both dressed all in white, palest skin I'd ever seen, both standing at the foot of my bed looking out the window. The woman looked average height, while the man reached the ceiling. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that I was dreaming, until the man turned and looked at me. His eyes were red. I turned sideways and covered my head, trying again to convince myself I was dreaming. After a few minutes, I looked over the covers, and the man was now standing at the side of my bed looking down at me. I remember nothing after. I talked to a specialist when I was older, thinking maybe I suffered from sleep paralysis due to these experiences, but that was not the case. In every experience, I could move, and even ran out of my bedroom multiple times. Great times. I live in an extremely old house. It creaks, it groans. The house isn't completely level, so sometimes unlatched doors swing open on their own, but really because physics. If you sat in my house on a windy day, you'd swear to God it was haunted, because the window frames aren't great, and the wind screams through the gaps and rattles the glass as though it were angered. I've lived here for a couple of years now. I know every noise this house makes like the back of my hand. I hardly notice it these days, which is why I found it odd that when I was brushing my teeth one night a few months ago, I clearly heard 2 men's voices on the other side of my bathroom door. Now it's just me, the dogs, and my boyfriend here. My boyfriend was across the hall laying in bed, and the dogs were with him. The voices I heard were clear as day, 2 older gentlemen. I obviously yanked the bathroom door open and looked to see who was in my hallway, but there was no one there. I listened for a few minutes, thinking maybe I heard the TV or something. I don't hear anything. I call out and ask if my boyfriend said anything. He hollers back no from where he's at in the bedroom. I go back to my nighttime routine, shut off the bathroom light, and now the hallway is dark. I'm gonna go to the bedroom. I bring my hand down from turning the light switch off, and my hand brushes up against a cold, rough-feeling hand, like someone with a lot of calluses on their hand. I felt the thumb and palm distinctly, like someone had reached out to grab my hand, but my movement kinda pulled out of the grasp before they could actually grab my hand, if that makes sense. The hand came from behind me, from in the bathroom. I obviously know there's no one in the bathroom. I just left the bathroom. And then I heard someone mumble from behind me. Not words exactly, just kind of a voice, like someone grumbling under their breath. I jumped, turned the bathroom light back on, saw no one, left the light on, and hauled it to the bedroom to tell my boyfriend what just happened, because I was extremely freaked out. We checked out the entire house for an intruder. Found no sign of any. Everything was locked up as usual. It's never happened again. I have no idea what it was. I was 20 at the time, and was helping my girlfriend move from Alabama to Los Angeles. Because she had all her belongings and her car, we decided to drive. At that time, she had a suspended license, so I was the one who was forced to drive the whole way. Because I didn't want to get any speeding tickets, I brought my radar detector from home to take with us on the drive. Now it was the 2nd day of our trip, and we had recently crossed into New Mexico. At the time, it was already well past sunset, so most of my drive that day was spent on the I-10 at night. I remember stopping that night really late at around 11 or 12 at a stop in Gage, New Mexico. The only thing, there was a small area with many identical concrete structures covering picnic tables. As we were pulling in, the radar detector started going haywire, showing codes for multiple different bands all at once. I turned the radar detector off, not really thinking much of it at the time, and pulled into a picnic area near the back. From what I remember, I was going to eat a snack or something to tide me over, and as I was grabbing the food from the middle row, I heard a low rumble and squeak, as if someone was rubbing their palm along the side of the car. As I was grabbing some items from a bag, my girlfriend at the time grabbed my arm with the most intense grip and fear and just started saying, "We gotta go," with increasing panic. I'll never forget what I saw, to be honest. In her side mirror, there was a large, rough silhouette leaning against the car just past the back door. Even from a glance, I could tell that the figure had to be much taller than the SUV, as it looked a bit hunched over. Seeing this, I immediately started to panic, as I was not sure if this was a person, animal, or whatever. As I was fumbling for the keys in the cup holder, I glanced in my side mirror and saw the same exact figure, motionless against the side of the car. A few seconds later, I started the car and punched it out of there, where our car was parked. There was nothing visible from the light coming from the picnic awning. I'm not a huge believer in paranormal stuff, but this was an experience that I would 100% call my only real paranormal encounter. It was the first anniversary of my aunt's death. She lived in the same house as me, but in a different apartment. I go to take a bath. The bathtub is positioned in a way that, when you are inside, you are facing the window. Suddenly, I hear a knock. I look at the window, and I see a hand formed into a fist quickly pulling down, like someone knocked and quickly disappeared. The thing is, my apartment was on the second floor, and there is no way that someone could reach the window from outside at all. Now looking back at it, I just tell myself it was just my imagination. But then, I know what I saw, and no one believed me, of course. I have many stories because I do cleansings for people and dabble in pagan practices. They all can be pretty wild, but the one most people have the hardest time understanding was witnessed by myself, my mother, and my sister. This occurred when I was 8, so 1998, a small town in Alabama. My family had bought this house on the lake, a real haunted house. Literally the second day of moving in, we experienced something. Also, this took place well before any dive into the occult. My family was non-denominational Christian. The house had 6 bedrooms, 4 baths, top and basement layout. We all had our rooms on the top floor. My room and my parents' room were the furthest down the hall. My sister was near the beginning, right across from the bathroom, so the hall wasn't super long, but my sister decided to put like 14 to 15 family portraits up on the walls. They varied in size and weight. Now, our mom was in the living room, which is what the hall opened to. So, not far and certainly in sight of one another. Dad was gone, probably work or something. I was in my room putting up posters. Nothing out of the ordinary, and it was midday. When my sister finished putting the pictures up, she came to get me to show me. She was proud of her work. We were right outside of my room talking when we suddenly felt super uneasy. The atmosphere had changed. I didn't understand it at the time, but it was just heavy and difficult to think straight and breathe. Needless to say, our conversation halted. Even my mom felt it and stopped unpacking things. She turned to look at us. All of a sudden, we felt and heard this worship of wind go from my parents' room right in front of us, down the hall. All of those pictures levitated off the wall and floated midair, resting in a horizontal position, parallel to the ground. We screamed and ran to our mom. We were hysterical, as you can imagine. Mom said she was scared, but she had to be a mama bear and protect her babies. She said firmly, "Stop, you are scaring my children." She also told it to leave because it was not welcome here. Now this part I didn't see because my face was buried into my mom's side as I was crying. She said the pictures all floated down and came to rest in their original spot. The ceiling seemed to just raise and become far away suddenly. My sisters saw this too. I have no idea how else to explain it. They only ever described it this way. But the house became normal and still again like nothing had ever happened. My dad never believed it, despite all three of us experiencing that. Honestly, that was the most tame thing we experienced in the house. 7 years of hell we endured there. I always put my keys in the exact same spot after I get home from work. No matter what, they always go in the dish in my living room. One day last August, I had been home from work for a few hours and was cooking dinner when the thought of "where are your keys" got stuck in my head. I looked around the corner. Sure as hell I was going to see my keys in the dish, but there were no keys. I looked around the surrounding area and expanded my search to my purse, jacket, bedroom, only to turn up empty. I drove home from work and let myself in with my keys. I was home alone, and my roommates had been out of town for a few days at that point, so I knew I had them, and I knew no one would have moved them. I flipped my house upside down, searching for about 4 hours before I half-heartedly shook my heaviest winter coat hanging in the back of my closet. I found them zipped up in the inside pocket of a coat I hadn't worn since mid-February at the latest. Everyone always brushes off the story, as I must have moved them and forgot about it. But that makes no sense to me. I have absolutely no clue how they got there, and I really only have 4 possible explanations. Paranormal activity, glitch in the matrix, I blacked out and moved them for whatever reason, or there was someone in my house, and that was the only thing they did. My bathroom is weird. One time, it illuminated from the outside, as if someone put headlights up to the window. Empty lots behind me and next to me. No outside light source, same bathroom. I often find the bottom vanity drawer pulled completely out and on the floor. It would have to be lifted off the rollers. Same bathroom. Cat was growling and freaking out and doing the stock stance. I live alone and, at the time, had 2 cats. I have one of those galaxy projection lights. It has a Bluetooth connection because it uses a remote to change the colors and settings on it. It also has a speaker on it for some reason to let you know if the remote is connected. One night, I had it turned off and sitting on my chair next to my bed. I was in a dead sleep when I heard the voice toggling on and off, saying, "Bluetooth disconnected." That was the initial thing that scared me because all I could hear was this disembodied voice. I found the source quickly and realized I had thrown some clothes over it, so the port was blocked. I fell back to sleep and was awoken again, this time in the morning, by a male voice saying, "Oh, hello, Blaze." It was coming from the direction of the light. Blaze is the name of my cat. I laid still for a moment, my heart pounding. I rolled over and found my cat sitting on the other side of my bed. He was in the room. That scared the hell out of me even more. I leapt out of bed and ran over to the thing and ripped it out of the wall. I haven't turned it on since. It's been sitting in a corner of my room with the plug detached. I'm afraid to plug it back in. I would blame hypnagogic hallucinations because I have had them before. Mostly my mom's voice calling my name. But the fact that my cat was, in fact, in my room, sitting basically in front of the light terrified me. My cats don't have collars or bells, so it's not like I would have passively heard him in my sleep coming into my room, and then imagined the voice. Not only that, but he seemed freaked out too, like he had heard the voice as well. I have no idea if it was that, or he was just reacting to me waking up. I inspected the whole device, looking for cameras and microphones. I was going to take it apart, but I was too scared of what I would find. I was playing outside by myself, and a truck kept driving down the streets. I got uncomfortable and started to walk home, and they followed. I stopped, they stopped, I ran, they drove faster. I started sprinting home, and when I came near other people, they turned around and drove away. When I arrived home, I told my mom and dad. Nobody believed me. It's been 5 years, and I'm still shocked. When I was around the ages 4 and 5, I would constantly see weird things in my bedroom at night. There would often be shadows on the wall talking to each other. It happened so often that I just took them to be normal occurrences. I saw all sorts of weird things at night, but the shadows were one of the things I saw most often. One night in particular, I was dreaming about being in a large landscape of rolling green hills. Dotting the hills were odd buffalo-type creatures. Something seemed off about them. They seemed unnatural, evil, and slightly monstrous. I started to get scared and woke up. Laying in my bed, I turned over and saw a horned, shadow figure on the wall directly above my door. I tried to ignore it and flipped back over. I could feel it watching me and kept flipping back, hoping it would be gone, but it was always there. It was staring and smiling. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore, so I started yelling for my mom. As soon as she came in, it vanished. I have no good way to explain the things that I saw as a child. There seemed to oftentimes be a blurring between my dreaming state and awakened state, so I may have just had a very active and odd imagination to the point where I was truly hallucinating on a regular basis. When I was about 6 years old, I had had enough of the crap, so I remember opening the front door of our house and screaming to everything that was bothering me. That's when my nights began to become more normal, and I eventually never had any more problems with them. Not sure if this is the scariest, but I grew up for a while in this crappy apartment complex in a bad part of California, early 2000s. One night, my little kid self woke up in the middle of the night, went out to get something to eat, I think, and took one look to the living room. Huge strange man is kneeling next to the TV. Big mustache, has a gun. We just stare at each other. I slowly walk back into my room and go to sleep. Next morning, I tell my mom what happened, and she calls the police. The part no one believes is the dude took our Wii, but not the little sensor thing that it needed to actually work. An out-of-body experience which I hope is never repeated. I was about 11, maybe younger, hard to remember, and was sick at school in the nurse's station, called a sick room at my school. Laying on the camp bed, feeling just generally weird, looking out the very tall, thin windows that are typical of Victorian schools in the UK. Then I felt this strange, I can only call it a juke to the side, but mentally, and I saw myself outside the window, looking in, and at the same time, I was looking out from the bed through the window at myself floating outside. Apparently, I yelled, but I don't remember that part. Then the nurse called my mum to pick me up, and I went home. I think I slept the rest of the day, but I have no clear memories of that part. I think my friends and I almost got struck by lightning or some electrical phenomenon in Petawawa, Ontario, when I was between 5 and 7. It was torrential rain, thundering, and very humid outside. I was ready to go in, but my friends, 2 sisters who were my age and younger who lived across the street from me, were stuck outside. I believe their teenage brother had locked them out as a joke. I was standing across their lawn, debating going in or sitting with them on their stoop, as the youngest sister was crying out of fear because of the thunder. Suddenly, a huge ball of bluish-white light came down from out of nowhere and seemed to strike the lawn between us. I remember it looked like it was spiraling or spinning, like a super bouncer. It seemed to bounce off the ground, and then it disappeared. The little sister screamed bloody murder, and they both dropped their umbrellas and were holding each other. I ran inside my own house. I remember still seeing the light when I closed my eyes, and it haunted me for quite a while after. The lawn didn't look damaged, and my mom thinks it was my imagination. When I was 7 or 8, I just got done watching an episode of America's Most Wanted, and I went out onto the front porch to blow some bubbles. As I was doing this, I saw a guy run out of the neighbor's house and hide behind some bushes, armed. Then I realize I hear police sirens getting closer. They suddenly stop before they get to my street. The guy looks over at me, makes this shush gesture, then runs across our lawn to the other neighbor's yard. To this day, and I swear to God this is true, I recognized his face as one of the guys on America's Most Wanted. Don't remember who. As far as I know, the cops didn't find him, and no one in my family believes that it happened. I was frozen in fear and shock until he ran out of my sight, at which point I ran back inside and told my parents what I saw. I don't blame them for not believing me, but at the very least, I did see a wanted criminal run across our yard that day. So there's this local legend that there's a cult that practices deep in the woods in my area. One night, my friend and I decided to go on a hike in the woods at like 1 in the morning. He said he knew the area. I did not at all. Unsurprisingly, he gets us lost. As we're wandering around aimlessly, we hear what sounds like dozens of voices chanting all at once. Immediately, our first assumption is we found the cult, because this is literally like 2 miles into the woods off of this road that's in the middle of nowhere, no houses or anything for miles. We walk closer to investigate because we're actual idiots, and this coyote appears on the trail in front of us. I swear it was some kind of spiritual thing or something because it literally appears out of nowhere. My friend got spooked and threw a gallon of milk at it. He brought the milk with him to drink. He's a strange one. Coyote runs off. We decide that we should probably rethink our investigation, especially considering we probably made enough noise to alert them anyway. I tell people this story, and they find it entertaining, but I don't think anyone actually believes me. This happened a few years ago. I was on a dating site and matched with an attractive person, so I started chatting. We made it to the plans tonight, part of the conversation, and she told me she was going to play hide and seek with Fluffy, and she was pointing out the item in her second profile picture, a bloody rabbit mask. Okay, let's be weird. So I played along until she mentioned that they would be playing in my basement. I thought, how in the hell? Wild guess, probably. I lied and told her I didn't have a basement. Immediately, she texted, "Oh yeah," and I heard my name booming from the basement. Obviously, I blocked her and froze for an hour before I gathered the courage to check my completely enclosed from the outside basement. I didn't find anything, thankfully. I didn't have a smart device at all, and I didn't have any speakers that could have been hacked. I didn't even have wireless internet at the time. The basement was completely empty. I can't explain it in the slightest. When I was in high school, I dated a guy who, to be frank, was always a jerk, but towards the end of our relationship, he started worshipping Satan. One night while on the phone, this was before cell phones, he said he sent something to pay me a visit that night. Not taking him seriously at all, I laughed like, yeah, okay, whatever. We hung up the phone, and I fell asleep. In the middle of the night, while asleep, I started feeling the worst stomach cramps I've ever had. Tossing and turning, waking up and trying to go back to sleep. It would not go away unless I opened my eyes and sat up. I settled, trying to sleep, and there was a whisper. It sounded like a man's voice saying, "Hey." It was right in my ear. I opened my eyes, looked around. Nothing. Closed my eyes again, drifted off, and again felt cramping to the point of sickness in my stomach as another whisper sounded, "Wake up." I sat up. The sick feeling stopped. At this point, I'm fully freaked out. The whispers sounded like someone hovering over me. I pulled the covers over my head and just tried to lay still and pretend I didn't exist and that it didn't just happen. Minutes went by, and I thought everything was fine. But then suddenly tapping started in my room, like someone was walking through and smacking things randomly. I'm not even ashamed to admit that I bolted from my bed and ripped my bedroom door open and ran out. When I was in high school, I had this sudden bout of nightmares and sleep paralysis. I wasn't going through a stressful time or anything, and I don't freak out easily. I grew up watching 80s and 90s horror films, and I normally sleep with total darkness and doors closed. These nightmares were super sudden and happened almost every night. It was constant sleep paralysis where my room was on fire, or there were bats thrashing around above me, or there was a figure hovering over my body and I couldn't breathe. The classic. Sometimes my speakers let out strange frequency-type sounds, even when they were switched off. Things would fall off my shelves, etc. My mom would always find me sleeping on the couch the next morning with the TV on because it was so crazy. Suddenly, it all stopped, and when I told my mom, she admitted that she had sought advice from a priestess who engraved a blessing for me on a silver pendant and instructed my mom to place it in my room. She didn't want to tell me to see if it would work. I've never had such episodes since. I rented a house a few years back and never believed in the paranormal or any sort of spirits, etc. My first week in the house was fine. A few creaks here and there, but nothing major. I very soon started to feel like I was being watched, or there was just a presence in general. The third week, I started waking up in the middle of the night with large scratches, almost cuts, going the length of my arm. From my wrist to my armpit, 3 scratches, all parallel, always on my right arm. I didn't think much of it. One night, I heard a loud bang, went to the back, and noticed my back door was open. Okay, no worries. I shut and locked the door with a deadbolt. Next morning, I wake up and the door is wide open, but the freaky part is the deadbolt is still in the locked position, as well as the knob. It really starts to freak me out now. I start telling a person I work with about this stuff. He told me his sister was a Native American shaman priestess, and she would come sage bless my house if I wanted. The next week, she came over with, I believe, it was called sweet grass and sage. She burned the sage while walking around and told me she could definitely feel a presence in the house. She hung the sweet grass over my bed, and ever since, I haven't had anything strange happen. Very strange. I was about 13, and my grandma was a believer in spirits, witches, etc. Well, I had just upset her, and she told me I was going to pay. That night, I woke up at about 3 in the morning, and I saw a little kid with a green shirt on in my room. He stared at me for about a minute, and I couldn't look away. He then ran out of my room straight through the door laughing. About 30 minutes later, another figure appeared in my room who looked about 15. He just stared at me and mumbled something, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't talk, scream, or move. I could only look. He then vanished into seemingly thin air. The next night, I woke up at about the same time, and it sounded as if there were 50 people in my room screaming at me, and just a lot of negative thoughts in general. The next day I got anointed, and it stopped. Later that day, I had to see my grandma, and I instantly started to get sick after I hugged her, and she just sat there with a smirk on her face. I then got anointed again, and it stopped. I still can't explain how she did it, but I still to this day, I'm afraid to make my grandma mad. My sister is really into occult and witchcraft kind of stuff. I think she meant to be Wiccan, but a 13-year-old isn't incredibly discerning. Around the time she got into it, our house started to get incredibly creepy. We would see things move out of the corner of our eyes. Nobody wanted to be home alone. Nobody wanted to be in the living room at night. At first, we could blame it on the house and the land. Then we moved, not just houses, but continents. The weird stuff followed. All of it was always centered around my sister and her room, and it was always aggravated when we did serious cleaning, and especially when we moved. The height of it was when we were moving back to the US. We had 2 different flight groups. My mom and sister left 6 weeks before the rest of us to pick the new house, while my dad, brother, and I cleaned and packed at the old house. We heard thumping from my sister's room. The windows and doors would open and close on their own, not possible from just the wind, and shadows would move wildly under the door pretty much every night, even with the blinds closed. I'm not sensitive to that kind of stuff, but it was plain as day even to me. It was only when my sister finally moved out of our next house, and we cleaned out her room, that it all ended. Whatever it was tied to my sister and any sort of disorder or uncleanliness. Kid I was friends with in high school who was jumped on 2 separate occasions. First, a mutual friend lured him outside his house, where a large group of dudes waited. One of them jumped him and beat him fairly badly. Second was a very high school, meet me after school type fight, which my friend won, and he was subsequently jumped by the fight loser's boxer friend. So fast forward a year or so, he and I have kinda grown apart. He tells me he's getting into Satanism and made a pact to sell his soul. He asked for the 3 bullies, the one that lured him, the loser of the second fight, and the boxer to all be killed. Luring guy perished in a freak car accident 2-ish years later, thrown from the back of a topless Jeep. Loser of the second fight went 4-ish years later and overdosed. Boxer passed 4-ish years later. Don't know. We're in our mid-40s now, and he's married with a kid. All probably total coincidence, but at the time, it was like, what did you do? My mom and I are both practitioners of witchcraft. I am a white witch, while my mom is a dark witch, which means she deals with hexes, curses, etc. My mom has hexed people in the past that have hurt her or her family. She is not afraid of karma or the rule of 3. One of the curses I saw was when I was a child. There was a man who worked with my stepfather who would constantly steal clients from him or would take credit for my stepfather's work. He actively tried to sabotage my stepfather's employment, and my mother got fed up. She performed a hex on him, and within days the guy had fallen from favor at work. All his clients were canceling appointments for various reasons. His deals were falling through. His hair was thinning from stress. His family was going through economic hardships, etc. The guy's life completely did a 180. And to this day, he hasn't fully recovered from it. He still struggles with making sales and is constantly getting on his employer's nerves. Another time, an old friend of mine and I had an awful falling out. Her betrayal really hurt me, and I fell into depression for a long while. She tried turning friends against me and did everything she could to hurt me. My mother decided to return some of that negative energy her way and performed a hex. I didn't know it at the time. Otherwise, I would have told her not to, but she put a curse on her and her family. Well, within days, everything went wrong. Her family fell into economic hardships, and they lost the family car and almost lost their house. Her father had a stroke out of nowhere, and with no family history of it. Thankfully, nothing serious, but he was bedridden for days and couldn't work. Her schoolwork suffered, and her family had a period of real tough times. My mom didn't tell me what she had done until months later, at which point I was terrified of her. Magic isn't something to be done lightly, and hexes especially are dangerous things. I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole, but my mom actively practices them. I worry when karma comes to collect. When I was a young kid, me and my friends were big into ghosts, the paranormal, the occult, or anything else creepy. I was a self-identifying witch, and we would often go ghost hunting in local places. One day, my friend comes up to me and tells me he had made a makeshift Ouija board and used it on his school bus. He had contacted a ghost that called itself A, and it was trying to warn us about something. Me and my other friend were curious and wanted to know more. I had recently gotten an actual Ouija board for Christmas, and I suggested that we should have a proper session at my house. So they all come over one day and set things up. Salt circle, candles, and lavender as a substitute for sage. We start the session, and things go wrong immediately. The board is saying weird and cryptic things, so we ask its name. The ghost goes by T. We ask what it is, and it just says proxy. A quick Google search of the word made us realize that T was a proxy for something a lot darker. Suddenly, we heard a loud noise coming from the closet. My friends went over to look, and I stayed back to keep my fingers off the planchette and not accidentally end the session without saying goodbye. They both screamed and ran out. They both claimed they saw a long, black shadowy thing with tiny white eyes curled up in the fetal position on the closet floor. We all freaked out and ended the session right there. I knew we had holy water in the other room, so we went to go get it. While we do, we hear another noise. We rushed back and found that the planchette, which we had taken off the board, was back on the board by itself, and all our other items were scattered around the board. We blessed the board right then and there. We talked to our ghosts a few more times. We saw the black shadow figure a few more times, most often outside our windows, watching from the street. We also saw a white figure with black eyes a few times. I also could not go into the basement closet without getting a terrible sense of dread. Eventually, we got the house smudged, and the sightings stopped completely. Now I'm a proper Wiccan and have resolved to never use a Ouija board again. The last apartment I lived in was me and 3 friends living together. The first 8 months in the apartment, everything was normal. Then there was 1 week where weird things started to happen. All of us got this really bad cold at the same time. The sickness would cause me to wake up every morning with such bad vertigo that I would throw up. Items in the apartment would go missing and turn up in a completely different part of the apartment. Like the TV remote would go missing, and then someone would find it in a kitchen cupboard, and every time this happened, no one remembered moving it. Knew they wouldn't have moved X object into Y location. Our oven stopped working properly, and I would wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that there was a presence hovering over my bed watching me. I followed all of the advice that my superstitious friends gave me. I covered all the mirrors in my room before going to bed, and I woke up one night and felt the presence of the ghost in my room and yelled at her to leave me alone. Anyway, after about 2 weeks of all of us feeling like we were losing our minds, roommate number 3 ended up telling the new guy she was dating about the weird supernatural stuff. Guy took it very seriously, and then went to confront his ex-girlfriend. It turns out his ex was a Wiccan, and one of the Wiccans who doesn't have a problem doing black magic, I guess, and she was super jealous that this guy was dating someone new. So the ex had put a curse on roommate number 3, and that's why our apartment had become haunted. I guess the guy said something to convince his ex that the way she was reacting was not fair. He got her to lift the curse, and our apartment immediately went back to normal. I went to a voodoo shop in New Orleans that had a lot of signs that said, "No pictures." My boyfriend's mom wanted some voodoo dolls and wanted to see pictures of them before he bought them. I told him not to because I had a bad feeling about it. Immediately after taking the picture, his cell phone lost signal, but mine was totally fine. He couldn't send the picture, so we walked outside and a car drove by and splashed him with water, but I was dry. Freaked us out. I told him to delete the pictures, and we had to buy the 2 dolls he took pictures of. When I first became a pagan, when I was 15 or 16, I celebrated Ostara by leaving an offering to the Fae outside on a wooden slab in my garden, which was fenced off and only accessible by going into it from the house. The offering was a little cake made with eggs and flowers, and the next morning it was gone, and in its place was a witch's whisk, a bundle of blackberry sticks bound with a vine or something. None of my family members, Mom and her husband, were home the day I left the offering, and neither had any idea as to where it could have come from. I believe them because my mom is terrified of the paranormal, and her husband is straight-laced and humorless, not the kind of guy to pull pranks whatsoever. To this day, I still have it. I was into witchcraft for a little while in high school. I was a white witch, or at least trying to be, and I got really into tarot cards. Being a dumb teenager, I didn't know how to properly use them, and instead of using them as an extension of my subconscious, I instead thought of them as their own entity. I would speak to them as if they were their own person. I never got good readings from them. After a while of using them, I would feel something watching me around my house, especially at night. It would follow me around the house and would be in my closet when I would go to bed. The feelings of anxiety and dread that I felt kept getting worse and worse, to the point where I wouldn't sleep at night. At some point, I stopped practicing, but it didn't go away. It would take a solid few months until it stopped. After it stopped, I went to look for my cards and my crystals. I could not find them. To this day, 5 years later, I still have no idea what happened to them. I have no doubt in my mind that whatever was following me had something to do with it. To be honest, when I go to my parents' house even now, I still feel like it's watching me, but it's not as intense as before. I used to work in an occult bookstore. We sold mostly psychic nonsense and spiritualist, new agey stuff. But there was a bookcase in the back with the real expensive stuff, and the owner was this real old, real wise man. This woman used to come in when I was working, and she'd just talk, for ages and ages. It was non-stop. She knew this, she did that, did you know about this, on and on. She'd suck up a ton of time. When she left, you'd just feel drained. One day, she comes in while the owner is there. She walks up to the counter and starts her SH-dick, and he's very polite and listening, but she just sort of runs out of steam, like within 60 seconds. She hums and haws a bit, and then walks out of the store. It would usually take me an hour to get rid of her, and he shut her down in a minute flat, with a smile on his face. I mention it to him, and he says, "There's a circle of protection painted under the floor for a reason." I once met one guy on the internet who practiced stuff. Before we ever met, I told him to make a summoning circle, like the ones you do when trying to reach a deceased person, but to reach me instead of someone deceased. At that time, I was quite delusional about my body. I considered my chest narrow and flat, but everyone else would say I'm very broad, strong, and muscular. But we only had each other's close-up face selfies. No way to see the body types. So he made the summoning circle and tried to summon me, but it didn't seem to work. Then we both went to sleep. The next morning, he said he had a dream about me and told me that he saw me looking very strong and muscular with broad shoulders. But I also had a dream where I saw him. He was very skinny. Then we met in real life to verify that. I was exactly like in his dream. He was exactly like in my dream. He even had the same scent about him. I got into Lavian Satanism about 2 or 3 years ago, and in the book, there's a section that says, "Don't pray to the devil himself," or something like. So one night I did, and nothing happened. A few weeks later, I had the most vivid dream that stuck with me even to this day. In the dream, I'm in one of my old high school classes, but all the seats are empty except for the one next to me. I turn my head and see a super muscular guy in a black t-shirt say, "I heard you've been trying to reach me," at which point his skin turns into a darker color and he gets even bigger. We had a long conversation, and at the end I said, "What a waste of time," after I said I was leaving. Once I opened the door and took one step out, everything was pitch black, silent and cold. What really creeped me out is that at the time, I was abusing a couple of substances, so one time my heart completely stopped beating for a few seconds as I was sitting in bed. I remember seeing that same door, the pitch black, freezing feeling before my heart started beating again. Doubt it's related, but it totally creeped the hell out of me. I took up meditation for a short while for 2 reasons. I have really bad anger issues, and I'd heard it helped, and because I wanted to try to have an out-of-body experience. I stopped shortly after I had my first out-of-body experience. When I did it, I was floating above myself, looking at my body sitting on my floor. But then I kind of fell into the ground, and everything was black for a while. But then I entered a big cavern filled with fire. I flew around there for quite a while, just searching around. I didn't really see anything interesting, just rocks and fire. Eventually, I felt a strong jerk, and was wrenched upwards till I was back in my own body. I quit meditating after that. When I was a teen, a bunch of my friends went through a Wiccan phase. I honestly thought it was a bunch of hooey, but played along for the most part, because hey, they could have got into substances or horses instead, right? But despite thinking it was bull, there was one moment that made me question things. Us girls had met up to hang out, and one was brandishing a wooden walking stick. "I have poured my energy into this totem," she declared, then started passing it around the room. The others cooed about how they could feel the power within as they held it. Of course, someone handed me the stick eventually. I could barely contain my eye roll as I took it. As I held the walking stick, it sent a tingling sensation up my arms. I passed it on quickly. Thank you everyone for your continued support on the channel. It is so deeply appreciated. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more eerie tales, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos. It really helps out the channel reach more viewers like you. If there are particular stories you want to hear, Please let me know in the comments. Until next time, my friends.